You're listening to a special podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care. My name is Leah Harris, and I am so pleased to introduce you to our guest today, Russell Stence. Russ is a retired school psychologist from Rochester, New York, whose eyes were open to how pernicious the mental health system can be through the experience of trying to support his own young adult daughter. As a result of these experiences, Russ and his partner have a mission to do all they can to promote real, sustained recovery for their daughters and to bring light and reform to a badly broken and often harmful system. Russ, welcome to the podcast. It's wonderful to have you.
It's an honor to speak with you today.
I'm hoping that you can share a bit of what it has been like for you, both as a psychologist and as a parent, to really come face to face with the harm that can be perpetrated in the name of health within this current paradigm of psychiatric care.
It's kind of been like a new education, kind of late in my career. I feel like I have sort of a PhD through the School of Hard Knocks because the kinds of things that you deal with as a school psychologist, most of the types of things that occur quite often, some of the more serious, what they call serious mental health, kind of has its onset in late adolescence and early adulthood. And that's exactly what happened in our case with my wife and I. Our second child, our oldest daughter, had a real setback during and following her freshman year in college. And that opened my eyes in a way. I mean, I had some inkling, but nothing like an up-close and personal experience when someone goes into some of the more stressful issues that get them very much involved in the mental health system as it is. And I use that term a little bit loosely based on my experience because in many cases it can be the beginning of a rather dark path in terms of when you get caught up in our mental health system. So anyway, that was an education and it's been continuing, but there's both good and bad points to that along the way.
Russ, why do you think so many young people struggle during that transition, right, from living at home with their families into college?
Sadly, I think a lot of this came after the fact when we looked back on it, including talking about things with our daughter. And I want to be quick to say all of what I say is with her full permission and blessing. She's very open, and people vary with that quite a bit. But I speak about my daughter knowing that she's totally okay with my saying this. But it almost seemed like it was a perfect storm during her freshman year in college. There were many, it was like a convergence of a number of stressors that just given her unique personhood, all the things that were going for her, it seemed like they came together in a very deleterious way. And to this day, it's hard to know if certain things had been different, would it have gone differently? It's hard to say. But I think that first year away, I mean, it can be, you think about this for kids that have been with their family, especially in her case, she went away out of state to a whole different environment. It's, negotiating friendships, the demands of academia, the pressures of that, some other kinds of pressures that come to play. And along with, issues of nutrition, sleep, the whole holistic aspect of what we are as human beings. There's a lot of things, and it is known that as we experience what occurred with her and talk with different people, we found that that's not that unusual for kids to be really thrown off course during that first year in college, especially if they're away from home.
Is there perhaps better ways to kind of support and respond to young people who are going through what can be an extremely challenging transition?
And that's interesting that you asked that, because in our daughter's case, when it became apparent that she was experiencing some pretty intensive anxiety that was interfering with her being able to do her work. And she was always a very strong academic student. But I remember talking with her, advising her, is there some counseling on campus? And she did seek that out. I think this is a very individual thing, from one college to another. But in general, it seems like people that are in the mental health system, I have to say that I think in many cases, what passes as education is a little bit more like indoctrination. And I don't want to even, in this case, again, it's been a a while. I don't remember all the specifics. So it was good that there was somebody there. But as far as their awareness of the whole gamut of things to look at, from, experiential things to, what the individual person's going through, it just seems like they're too often schooled in the idea that you've got to, go the direction of fairly quickly medication. And again, in her case, I don't want to fault that person on that, but I think there's just across the whole spectrum of mental health professionals, I don't think there's nearly enough awareness of things like trauma, of stress, of nutrition, of sleep. A lot of things that if they're addressed can make a huge difference. And one thing I'm really remiss about myself, and I give my wife credit for having thought of this, and I wish that, you can't go back and change things, but this was our first child to go to college. I'd be more apprised of the idea, hey, you can take a medical leave. Just take some time to take a breath, get a handle on things, do things, circumspectly. And, we didn't do that. And that, I think, contributed to things that turned out very, very stressful, very difficult for her.
A lot of colleges and universities, when a young person exhibits distress or is suicidal or is in crisis in some way, they'll actually force the young person to take an involuntary leave, or there's involuntary leave policies.
That isn't what happened in her case. What we did, to my regret, and again, this was my initiation into what people call serious mental illness, or at least the beginnings of it. I don't remember what the counselor there was suggesting, but anyway, she finished out the year. She really kind of came to an impasse, could not do her work. They didn't, mandate a leave. Like I said, in retrospect, I wish I had thought of that. Really, it seems common sense, but they didn't mandate that. Unfortunately, we did sort of the quick fix thing. Went to our, general practitioner doctor a weekend. She got prescriptions of medications, went back with them, and took one of the two for anxiety, and it seemed to be helping her. Well, she said it helped her anxiety, but it didn't really help her be able to do her work. So she was going to stay and just kind of do an extended thing, finish up her work with an older woman she'd gotten to know in the program. She felt good about. But then she stopped taking the medication cold turkey without our knowledge. Whether it would have happened without that, can't say. But and she is in a much, much, much better place now. So I'm very thankful for that. But as far as the college mandating that's one of many aspects of a very coercive mentality that exists that very much concerns me. I think of Martin Luther King's statement that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I am so convinced of the truth of that and hope to be part of the solution, God willing.
You had talked a little bit about, how part of the struggles that your daughter faced involved medication or not wanting to take medication or just figuring out what is optimal. Why do you think there is such a lack of true informed consent when it comes to psychiatric medications, right? Even kind of the consequences of stopping them cold turkey.
Oh, my goodness. I think that's a multifaceted answer. If I were to be the most benign, I'll start out that way. Sometimes, because I've kind of been in this place, I have to admit, where you think, okay, well, gosh, something is needed here, and we're being told this is what's needed. And so maybe if we lay everything out completely, the person will not want to do it. But that's not good. I'm telling you that honestly. But I think there's a whole lot of this is my opinion. I think it's more than opinion because I see it up close and personal, that people in the system, I think in some sense have been more indoctrinated than educated. And so they simply have not been informed adequately to inform people coming under their, quote, care. They're not even aware of just how adverse certain things can be. They're given a very, an overly benign picture of so many things. The benefits are touted. Those who have a positive response are touted. The adverse effects are way downplayed, and the people who end up being collateral damage of the system are not really, given any credence. And so I think there's a whole knowledge base there that it's very lacking. Interestingly, there's a prophet who said, for lack of knowledge, my people perish. I see no more area in which that is more true than in the, quote, mental health system. There's a lack of knowledge. When they do know, you're probably well aware that many people talk about the whole chemical imbalance, and it's always presented, you need a little bit of this to restore the brain chemical balance. Mm-hmm. And often they know that's not true, but they say it anyway because it sounds good, people believe it, blah, blah, blah. I think society at large has been indoctrinated in a lot of this stuff, and so they repeat it, thinking that they're speaking the truth, but it's very flawed. So there's a concern that, well, maybe the person really needs it, but they can't be given the full knowledge, or they won't comply. And that whole issue of compliance is another pernicious trap. And oh man, the circular reasoning, the circling of the wagons within the mental health system, where they're covering their tracks, and I've seen it, and I'm actually in the midst of it. I won't say too much about it, but there's another person very, very close to me who's in the throes of basically being swallowed up by a system that's just full of half-truths, untruths, and the lack of real, even curiosity. I see people in the system sometimes as what I would call very incurious. Okay, you have a very difficult situation. You would think that there should be a lot of inquiry about that, and what's going on here, but there's too much of a one-size-fits-all. And they take the people that have had a positive response and sort of showcase them, but totally consigned to the scrap heap those who have been harmed and continue to be harmed by continuing to relentlessly pound square pegs into round holes, or vice versa.
What is your advice to other parents, right, who are perhaps in a similar situation, really wanting to do the best by and for their kids?
Well, first of all, my heart really goes out to parents in this kind of a predicament. And when this occurred with my older daughter, like I say, my eyes were open. That really changed me as a professional. I was a practicing school psychologist at the time. A lot of my work was on the Committee on Special Education in my local school district. And when parents, we always have to be careful. We're not doctors, we're not prescribing, but when a situation would come up where a youngster was in some emotional distress, parent was considering, psychiatric services, medication, so forth and so on. And sometimes, it could be with learning problems, emotional problems, behavioral problems, whatever. I came to the point where I would always tell them, okay, if you're seeking psychiatric services or with your family physician or whatever, and you're looking at medication, for example, I'm not going to tell you don't do it or do it, but what I tell them, and anyone listening to this, be very circumspect. First of all, trust your own observations. Trust the fact that your child, your loved one. If you do go the route of trying a medication or something else, remember what it was that prompted you to do that. And then when you see things emerging that maybe are even different from what you saw and what prompted you to go that route, remember a couple things. You can always go back. You don't have to continue. And if they try to tell you, oh, this has unmasked another issue, and that's, I think, I will take the issue of pediatric bipolar, which I am very, very concerned about that whole thing, because that can be induced by the medications they use for ADHD or depression. And so remember that could very well be a substance-induced reaction, but remember that you don't have to go down that route, and nobody can force you, although I'll tell you, and I know this up close and personal, you can come under great duress around those kinds of things. But trust your judgment. Remember that yourself or your child better than other people do. You're the one that's going to be there with them, and be very careful when you go down that road. And be very, a healthy skepticism about the diagnoses, because as I'm sure you know, Leah, they can change. They can and do change. People have this false notion that they're very specific. None of them have any biomarkers. They're all behavioral constellations. If medications are introduced and new symptoms emerge, which may be adverse reaction to the medication, the default seems to be, oh, that's the illness, or we're unmasking something else. And that, I think people really need to have their eyes open. I tried to do that in my role in our own local district when people would come, and I could take people aside afterwards and say, hey, I know what you're going through. them. I've experienced it. Hang in there. Be there for your son or daughter or your loved one. Have confidence. These are all professionals or doctors, but you know your child better than they do.
I just want to thank you on behalf of the foundation, not only for the way that you have fought for your own family, but the way that you speak out and advocate and really fight for a system that works much better for people and for families. So thank you again for all that you do and for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Leah. It's been an honor, and I really appreciate all that you're doing and have done.